for the speakers, please submit to everybody or privately to the host via the chat feature. We will do our best to get to as many questions as possible later on. Lastly, today's Trade Talk will be recorded and posted on the WIT website. With housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. I'll now pass over to my co-chair, Susie Zimmerman, who will moderate the session. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Leah. I'm excited to welcome our speakers today for this very timely discussion on how women and youth can be the engines behind Africa's economic development, especially through their participation in trade. And while I'm not volunteering with WIT, I work in UPS's policy team focusing on our advocacy in Africa. And much of our work revolves around trade facilitation. That is, ensuring that the mechanisms of trade are such that even the brand new business person can navigate the process. So we see trade as a major factor in driving the strength of the African economy, and inclusive trade that enables participation by all entrepreneurs is critical to reap the full benefit. So now we're calling this event timely for a couple reasons, just to set the scene. First, trade-wise, we have just seen last weekend the African Union's Heads of State Extraordinary Summit, where they announced officially that the start of trade under the African Continental Free Trade Area will begin on January 1 in just 3 weeks' time. And of course, in the background, we're watching the negotiations towards the US's first bilateral trade agreement in sub-Saharan Africa with Kenya. And then secondly, this event is timely because as markets around the world are still reeling from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think we can all agree that giving women and youth the adequate tools to participate in the economy is going to help boost that market resiliency we need and regain Africa's collective commercial strength. So in that context, let me briefly introduce our speakers today, and then we'll start with some questions. So first off, we have Ambassador Hilda Suka-Mufudzi, who is the head of the African Union Representational Mission to the United States. And while she is new to the role, just a couple months in, she is certainly not new to the world of diplomacy. She has held several high-profile roles in politics and other public service positions in Zimbabwe, including 5 years as a member of parliament. And over the course of her career, she has worked with civil society to influence and advance economic and social well-being, including gender mainstreaming, and has led the implementation of projects and programs aimed at improving the quality of life in rural communities, especially for marginalized groups. Then we have Dr. Louise Fox, who is a development economist and a non-resident senior fellow with the African Growth Initiative at the Brookings Institution. She specializes in strategies for employment creation, opportunity expansion, economic empowerment, and poverty reduction, and has advised governments, international organizations, and nonprofit organizations around the world. She has held full-time positions at USAID as chief economist and at the World Bank, and she has been published extensively. And to highlight her most recent book, Youth Employment in Sub-Saharan Africa, which was published by the World Bank in 2014. And then, of course, we have Dr. Marila Malashevska, who is the senior economist in the World Bank's Trade and Regional Integration Unit. Her areas of expertise cover various aspects of trade policy and regional integration, with a special focus on the impacts of trade on poverty and income distribution. She's also the lead author of the World Bank's analysis of the economic and distributional effects of the African Continental Free Trade Area, to which we will, of course, put the link in the chat box, and we encourage you to check that out. So I'm going to ask a first round of questions to get us started. First off to Ambassador Suka-Mufudzi. Your Excellency, could you maybe give us a brief overview of the African Union's Agenda 2063, especially the goal of creating, as it says, an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential offered by African people, especially its women and youth? And of course, how is the AU ensuring that women and youth can contribute to the strengthening of the African economy? So over to you. You are on mute. I'm sorry, I'm going to take you off mute, Ambassador. There we go.
I would want to begin by thanking the Association of Women in International Trade for organizing this virtual event focused on women and youth empowerment, a topic that is so dear to my heart, I must say. I'm really honored to be among these distinguished panelists. And just to respond to your question, the African Union Agenda 2063 constitutes a blueprint and a master plan for transforming Africa into the global powerhouse of the future. The AU Agenda 2063 is an affirmation of the commitment of African heads of states and government to support Africa's new path for attaining inclusive and sustainable economic growth and development. The same Agenda 2063 was adopted at the 50th anniversary solemnity declaration during the Golden Jubilee celebrations of the formation of the OAU, CAM AU in 2013, May 2013. Agenda 2060 encapsulates not only Africa's aspiration for the future, but also identifies the key flagship programs, including the African Continental Free Trade Area. Those programs are meant to boost Africa's economic growth and development, and they lead to the rapid transformation of the continent. Regarding African women and youth's place in the AU Agenda 2063 and their effective participation, African leaders agreed that no society can reach its full potential unless it empowers women and the youth and it removes all obstacles to women's full participation in all areas of human endeavors. Africa must provide an enabling environment for its women, children, and young people to flourish and reach their full potential. In addition, during this changing global context, and in our times, the modern information revolution, the creativity, energy, and innovation of Africa's youth shall be the driving force behind the continent's political, social, cultural, and economic transformation. Young African men and women constitute the path breakers of the African knowledge society and are contributing significantly to innovation and entrepreneurship. It's like nearly every young person, a woman, are entrepreneurs. And I think we should tap on that. In the education sector, for instance, following continental policies are being implemented. The Continental Education Strategy for Africa, 2016 to 2025. The Continental Strategy Technical and Vocational Education and Training, the Science, Technology, and the Vocational Education and Training, the Strategy for Africa, 2024, and the Pan-African University. This to open opportunities for their employment. AU has put in place the African Union Youth Volunteers Corps, another flagship project, which recruits, trains, and deploys young African professionals to serve as professional volunteers for a period of 12 months across the continent, a project launched in 2010. For women empowerment, and through the AUC Women, Gender and Development Directorate, the following areas were prioritized. implementation of the Solomon Declaration on Gender Equality in Africa, the Maputo Protocol on Women's Rights in the African Women's Decade, building partnerships and advocacy, strengthening women's voices in peace processes, development of African gender mainstream mechanisms, tools including the African Gender Scorecard in the guidelines, operationalizing the Fund for African Women and the strengthening capacity of AUC, AU organs, regional economic communities, and member states in gender mainstreaming. Also, the EU Commission Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security's work with women in conflict enabled the introduction of the gender dimension in the peacekeeping process and the protection of the human rights, and that is in general. The pre-summit gender meetings held before each African Union summit provides an important forum for ministers of gender women's organizations, networks and groups, the EU, regional economic communities, the African Development Bank, UN, agencies, and other partners to meet in a common forum and to monitor progress and agree on action to advocate the cause of women and girls. I think with that, I've answered your questions, Susie. I thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. I'd love to turn next to Louise. Many of us have heard the statistic that 60% of the continent's population is under 25 years old. This is a lot of young people that are looking for gainful employment. And over the course of your career with the World Bank and USAID and now Brookings, what have been the top recommendations for African policymakers and other stakeholders for tapping into this demographic's enormous economic potential? And I'll share these slides that you provided.
Okay. Well, while you're sharing the slides, I just want to say that that statistic really refers to sub-Saharan Africa, low-income countries and lower middle-income countries. So it's not true, for example, of South Africa, and it's not true of North Africa, where the fertility transition is, of course, much further along. So in these young countries, the ones that are particularly have a young population, my main recommendation is usually to start with some foundational statistics. So in these countries, the issue is not really job creation. That is too narrow an objective. The issue is improving employment opportunities. And as I'm going to show you in the next slide, go ahead. The real issue is that informal is normal and will be normal and it will persist. And that's where the creation of opportunities becomes very important. So this slide is some work I did in 2014 that shows you that in 2010, most Africans worked, and this does not include North Africa. This is a sub-Saharan Africa slide. I need to tell you that. Most Africans really worked in agriculture, household farms and firms. Household agriculture or self-employment, family employment, like a family business, like running a bar or some kind of kiosk or selling stuff in the market. And those are called household enterprises. So very few actually had wage jobs until you get to the upper middle income countries like South Africa. So these are and the reason why South Africa and the upper middle countries have a much different employment profile is that these are the countries that really have transformed, and they have enough firms now to absorb much of the increases, the majority of the labor force and much of the increases to the labor force. Go ahead, next slide. Now, in 2014, we predicted the employment structure in 2020. And as you can see, there's not much, because why is that? That's because employment transformation takes a lot of time. I mean, where are people most likely to get jobs? in an economy that is slowly transforming, probably where their parents got jobs. So we expected a slightly larger wage employment in the lower middle income countries. And we predicted still a lot of jobs in agriculture. And especially with high labor force growth implied by those numbers you cited, Susie, it really is changing the structure of employment. Is really like trying to turn a tanker around in the ocean against a demographic tide. Next slide. So what really happened? Okay, these are more recent data, which don't seem to be, there they are, which are coming into focus. So these are more recent data from 2018, and this shows the wage employment rate. So what you can see is that our projections were pretty much on target. There's been a little change, not much. And what's important about this is that it shows that in terms of the employment transformation and creating wage employment jobs, Sub-Saharan Africa is behind the rest of the world, except for the upper middle income countries, which is dominated by South Africa. And South Africa has a very high wage employment sector, but also a very high unemployment. I must say, when you compare this with our projection that I showed you, we were a little perhaps less optimistic about job growth in the lower middle income countries than perhaps we could have been, but it's still we're still kind of right on track. And what's important about these numbers also is to note that in the lower middle income countries and the low income countries, half of the wage employment is casual and informal. So our message is you can't just focus on this picture. If your goal is job creation, meaning wage jobs, you will leave out most of the economy. So employment policies and strategies really need to focus on raising employment and earnings in the household farms and firms, in agriculture, in agro-processing, tremendous opportunities, and also in the non-farm informal sector, people making stuff, selling stuff, etc. And there are ways to do that, which I think have been discussed in our book and have been discussed by many others. Okay, the last slide. So I want to bring up the gender issue. And here, these graphs, I think, really tell an important story. By age 25, 80% of African females have married and given birth. By age 20, 50% have had a child. Now, this makes economic empowerment, frankly, very difficult. And so African girls and young women need help, as the ambassador has so clearly stated. What needs to be done? Marriage below the age of 18 needs to be ended on the continent. Africa has the highest rate of child marriage below the age of 18. And some countries are doing it. Ethiopia has done it and done it quite quickly. So it is possible. Of course, we need to increase access to contraception and a variety of contraceptions. The unmet need for contraception is quite high in Africa, and promote women's reproductive health. But we also need to ensure that girls and young women stay in school and get access to technology. We need to stop the mobile phone gender gap. We need to address that now. And we need to get women into higher education also. In South Africa, the ratio of females to males is 1.2. That means more females, more women are in tertiary education than males. But in Kenya, it's 0.7. And that's what's got to change too. And of course, another issue we could talk about is a voice and accountability as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Louise. I'm gonna stop sharing. So, and of course, Marilla, I'd love to have you now speak specifically about the trade and gender dynamic, but let's go at it first from a high level. Could you give us a general view of gender parity in Africa's economy and the work you have done with your World Bank colleagues regarding trade and gender and its importance to economic development?
Rosie, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to participate in the panel. I'm delighted to be here. Let me start by saying a few words about the research report that the World Bank and WTO colleagues have conducted on the role of trade in promoting gender equality. And its key findings are that the new trends in global trade, such as rising services, global value chains, and digital economy, are opening up important economic opportunities for women. Trade has the potential to expand women's role in the economy, decrease inequality, and expand women's access to skill and education. But of course, to reap those rewards, countries need to adopt reforms in trade policy that reduce discrimination against women while building the significant human capital that women represent. So why is that? Just to give you a little bit more explanation behind why we believe that trade is so critical to generation of employment for women, we've looked at the data on the employment of women in developing countries. And what we find is that trade increases that firms that are exporting or involved in global value chains or where foreign direct investment is present, they tend to employ more female workers than domestically owned firms or firms that are not involved in trade. For example, in developing countries, women make up to 33% of the workforce of exporting firms as compared to 24% for non-exporting firms. So not only firms that are involved in trade generate more jobs for women, but they also pay higher wages. Now, moving on to the report on Africa specifically, where we looked at the employment, where do the female workers work at the continent? It's really hard to generalize because there's a lot of heterogeneity across countries, but there are some common trends. And what we find is that sectors that tend to employ more women are those that typically are those are typically sectors that are services sectors, but also, of course, the textiles, wearing apparel, and processed food, agriculture. What we find that on average, women make 33% of the workforce in those sectors. But of course, there is again large variation across sectors where, for example, in the share of female workers in recreational services is almost 50%. In textiles, wearing apparel, it's about 30%. In terms of wages, what we found is that on average, the wages of female workers are 23% lower than those of their male counterparts. But of course, there again is a huge heterogeneity of outcomes across countries and sectors. There are some sectors, though, that tend to pay higher wages for female workers, and those are insurance and real estate services. And I'm happy to tell you more about the opportunities that will come with the AFCFTA, but I think as a snapshot of the current situation, I will stop here. And let me stop sharing the screen.
Great, thank you. Yes, we'll certainly return specifically to the AFCFTA, but I first wanted to, in a second round of questions, and again, I encourage our audience to please pose any questions that you might have for our panelists in the Q&A function, or feel free to raise your hand. Ambassador, going back to you, as we start to look specifically at the African Continental Free Trade Area, how do the African Union member states hope to improve the participation of women and youth through this landmark trade pact in particular? You touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to focus specifically on the AFCFTA. Oh, we got to take you off mute. Oh, still on mute.
Sorry.
Here we go. We don't want to lose anything you're saying.
Yeah. Just the African Continental Free Trade Area is a legal instrument, an agreement among the African Union member states to create a single market. But the African Continental Free Trade Area represents much more, I must say. On the one hand, it is a significant milestone on the journey to African integration and development. On the other hand, it is a catalyst for new ways of doing business producing, working and trading within Africa and with the rest of the world. And I believe that for the African Continental Free Trade Area to succeed, it has to be inclusive and address inequality in all its forms, including gender inequality. This is how we are pushing this thing further in regards issues to do with the women and the youth. Concrete policy measures and investments are needed, in particular to ensure that women and youth account for the majority of the population. Business owners and workforce can be better integrated into the value chains. Jobs, as the previous speaker is mentioned, and opportunities stemming from the African Continental Free Trade Area. According to the recent Futures report, making the African Continental Free Trade Area work for women and youth, which was co-produced by the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat and the UNDP, over 70% of cross-border traders, especially those engaged in formal trade, are women. Understanding their needs and giving them a platform to speak is incredibly important. The youth are Africa's largest composite of the human capital. As the youngest continent, Africa needs to invest in ensuring that its youth have credible pathways to engage in productive activities so that they may reap the promise of their dreams and become architects of their own prosperity. If I may take it further to say, the African Development Bank points out that these businesses operated by women are a key source of income for many poorer households. It developed into more productive enterprises. Micro enterprises could be a driver of inclusive growth. And whatever has to be happening, everyone will be on board. No one will be left behind. It can enhance the intra-African trade through the value chain. Yes. The good news is that African leaders are committed to women empowerment through African Continental Free Trade Area. This is a plus. Just recently, on Saturday, a meeting that attended December 5th, 2020, the Assembly of the African Union, held a 13th extraordinary session on the African Continental Free Trade Area and adopted the decision on the start of trading on the 1st of January 2020. There are celebrations in the ground about all this. People could not wait. As you know, the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa, and the current chairperson of the African Union, actually said, today we stand on the cusp of a new era in the progress of our continent. The moment that we have all been working painstakingly towards it is finally arrived. We are all filled with a great sense of pride at how far we have come to reach this moment. Few people have come a long way. 1 January, there will be celebrations on the ground in the continent, I must say. During the session, African leaders confirmed that the African Continental Free Trade Area will help advance the empowerment of Africa's women by improving women's access to trade opportunities, which will in turn facilitate economic freedom for women and expand the productive capacity of countries. They are committed to ensure that there is sufficient support given to women-owned SMEs and cooperatives in both local and regional economies. As you may know, on the ground in the continent, once you find an agenda, an issue, a project, the presidents, the leaders have done a buy into it, it will really flourish. And women will certainly celebrate. Well, I would want to think they recognize that women in trade, young Africans, SMEs confront significant challenges when attempting to benefit from these agreements. In the while recognizing that for the African Continental Free Trade Area to be inclusive and then to ensure shared growth across the continent, women, young Africans, SMEs have to be at the heart of its implementation. And those are clear, positive, and encouraging messages from African leaders. I must say, on their commitment to ensure that the pursuit of women and youth in the African continent is effective.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, we certainly applaud the African Union for incorporating a protocol on women in trade into the AFCFTA and that announcement. And to your point, Ambassador, we know that globally, at least women business owners who export hire more, they pay their employees more, they're more productive, and they reinvest more back into their communities. So thank you for those thoughts. Marilla, and I just want to go back to what you were talking about. I think the ambassador's comments are a good segue back to the AFCFTA. And as the lead author of the World Bank's analysis on the AFCFTA, could you tell us some of your findings regarding the trade agreement's impact on women and inclusive economic participation?
Yes, absolutely. Let me share my screen again. And I just want to walk you through key findings of our recent report that the team at the bank has conducted on the economic and distributional effects of the AFCFTA. And just like the ambassador Suka Mafudze just said, I couldn't agree more. We also strongly believe that the agreement will be a major opportunity to help African countries diversify their export, attract FDI, accelerate growth, provide new job opportunities for female and male workers, and reduce poverty and inequality. And our findings are aligned with this with these claims. We've done some stylized analysis of the implications of the AFCFTA, looking at the various policy areas such as tariff reduction, reduction of non-tariff measures, and trade facilitation that Susie mentioned earlier as being such an important component of generating more trade and growth. And what we find is using our assumptions on what the AFCFTA means in terms of tariff and TME trade facilitation measures, that could bring significant boost to intra-African trade and growth. So what we find is that by 2035, as compared to the baseline without the AFCFTA, the AFCFTA would generate 81% more of intra-African trade. It would also boost economic growth, on average at the continental level by 7%, but some countries would benefit much more than others, depending on the initial barriers to trade and the degree of regional integration. But what's interesting also is that one of the biggest gains would come from not so much from the tariff reduction, some additional gains from reduction of non-tariff measures such as regulatory barriers to trade, sanitary and phytosanitary measure harmonization of those measures would reduce the trade cost. But the biggest gains would come from the trade facilitation measures such as that would reduce red tape, lower compliance costs for traders, and ultimately make it easier for the African businesses to integrate into regional value chains. And these reforms will be difficult, they will be costly, but tackling those at the border, behind the border cost of trade is critical to generate benefits. And why is it important? Because faster growth and trade and growth will boost job opportunities both for female and male workers. And what we find that on average, there will be more jobs generated in sectors that tend to employ female workers more intensively. So here are a few examples of sectors that we anticipate that the relative growth of female workers will be a bit faster. So those are again some services sectors, but tourism, construction, again textiles, agriculture, and others. But what's more important, in addition to those new job opportunities, those jobs will tend to pay higher wages. So as a result of AFCFTA, we expect that the average wages for female workers will be 10.5% higher than in the baseline where the AFCFTA would not have been implemented. And the male workers' wages grow faster as well. But the fact that female workers' wages grow a little bit faster means that we are getting closer to closing that wage gap that I was talking about earlier. So just to give you a perspective, the differences are big across countries and sectors, so it's really hard to summarize, but overwhelmingly we see the wages of female workers growing faster. And just to give you a flavor of what that means, so that 10%, 10.5% higher wages, this translates about 2 weeks of extra pay each year. So it's enough for a woman earning $5 a day to pay for one family member's personal supplies, school supplies, and uniform for an entire school year. And I think I'll stop now, but I'm happy to share more details about our findings and policy recommendations. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Let me ask one more question, then we'll try to get some audience questions in here as well, given the time remaining. Louise, we of course can't speak to any topic these days without incorporating the subject of COVID-19. And I know you already alluded to how 2020 is kind of thwarting expectations, but could you tell us a little bit about how youth employment has been impacted by the pandemic, and whether the efforts by the African Union or the AFCFTA will help to mitigate some of those pandemic consequences?
Sure. Well, you know, the important point to understand about Africa is that most youth can't afford unemployment. As you saw in the slides I presented, you know, unemployment is really only a major factor in the upper middle income countries, although it is also a major factor in some countries that are at the very high end of the lower middle income level in North Africa. For example, in Morocco and Tunisia. But in general, most youth can't afford to be unemployed. But what happens is they're not able to realize their ambitions. They're not able to make use of their education because, you know, commerce comes to a stop. It's not just that firms aren't creating jobs. Many opportunities in the informal sector have been hurt as well. Women especially have lost income, but most informal sector workers have lost income. And the ILO estimates that overall labor income in all of Africa has gone down 10% in the first 3 quarters. Now, I just want to say that the African efforts to deal with the pandemic have been very productive. Very important. Of course, you know, the economy can't recover until the pandemic is under control, or at least it can't fully recover. Africa is very dependent both on the world economy and on its own economy. And so the cooperation between the African CDC, the AU agencies, the UN, including WHO, has really been better than ever before. And that's something to celebrate. So that I would say that's been a real plus in the situation on the continent. There's been real leadership. Now, in terms of the African free trade agreement, I have to say I alternate between optimism and pessimism. And I think that Marla showed us why. Obviously, it has the potential to be a real game changer for growth and for jobs. And it could potentially support the modernization of agriculture. It could support the growth of an African manufacturing sector, especially for heavier goods that are expensive to move around, move from other continents. And it could support the development of a world-class logistics sector. This is currently a very poor sector, poor performing sector in Africa compared to the competition. But the challenges are the existing ways of doing business and the existing distribution of the gains from the current situation, which is not as much trade. And I would say old habits die hard. So what's important about the numbers that Marla presented is that it really requires the removal of non-tariff barriers. What are non-tariff barriers? Those include things like slow or corrupt customs, unsafe and expensive roads, and illegal checkpoints. And so then when I think about that, I get pessimistic. And when I think about the struggles of the East African community, which really provided a good laboratory, you know, I remember at the beginning, the Tanzanians were afraid of a flood of Kenyans, goods, and professionals. Well, if the Tanzanians are afraid of competition from Kenya, imagine competition from Morocco or South Africa. Is Nigeria, the biggest economy on the continent, really willing to open up to competition? So I think it is important to make Africa free trade agreement work for women and youth. I think making those changes, those structural changes, are really important. And so we should certainly focus on the potential, but we have to realize it could be a potential loss. And countries will behave differently. And that's the important point. So different countries might behave differently and have that and gain or lose.
Great, thank you so much for that. And I totally agree. In a meeting yesterday with some of the African Union negotiators, we were making the point that lower tariffs are great, but they won't do much if there's complexity at the border or other non-tariff barriers are going to actually prevent those goods from reaching their destination. So great points there. I want to maybe pose this question that came in from the audience, if I may. This is from Regina, who asked, what channels or methods could individual businesses in the USA connect with those in the trade area to promote women business owners in particular? Ambassador, I don't know if that's a question you would be willing to take on, connecting the US businesses with companies in Africa, especially women-owned businesses. Still on mute. There we go.
Yeah, we are certainly looking at it.
I'm sorry, it's a little hard to hear you. I'm sorry. Is it possible to maybe get closer to the...
This is a question from the audience, is it?
Yes.
From the participants. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know if I will really give you a good answer here, but just to say, these are all areas that we're trying to put together to make it easier for women to know. Well, information is the power. It's a thing I can say. Information is power. These women need to have these things, this information on a place where it's easier for them to access. And I think there's more to go into the women, down to the ground, and deal with them on these issues so that they know exactly where to find the information. Yes, I agree with you. There is a challenge around that. Yes, we have girls who have done their first degrees, who have done their masters, who say, oh, I want to do 1, 2, 3, but how do I go about it? I agree with you. It's an area that we have to look into seriously. I don't know if I got that answer.
I know that, Ambassador, there's also this potential business advisory group for the African Union that's being stood up, and maybe that's an avenue for U.S. companies to engage, but also ensuring that there's adequate women's representation as well, providing feedback to the African Union Commission and the AFCFTA Secretariat. Marilla or Louise, do you have any thoughts on that one, or should I move on to the next question?
I'm okay. Go ahead to the next question.
Okay. Leah, I don't know.
Just to add to it, well, I don't know the specific channels in which the US companies can connect, though I see there are some good suggestions in the chat already from the participants. But just to mention the importance of e-commerce, just having the ability to join those platforms for female-owned businesses and I think that's one of the channels through which the companies can connect by being able to shop online and ship maybe products from small companies in Africa to US and other places. But of course, that involves a lot of investment on the US side to in terms of gaining information, gaining access to those companies, and making sure that the cost of operating such exchange are not too high. Just mentioning the importance of e-commerce in this.
I must say, I would add that, of course, the new Development Finance Corporation, US DFC, has committed to promoting women businesses as part of its business practice and its philosophy. And I'm not sure how successful it's been because it doesn't always publish all its data very timely, but it's certainly committed to that. And so that's an important point. There were some places mentioned in the chat, like SheTrades. So I don't think I need to, and there are other NGOs as well.
Great, thank you. Leah, do you have a question that you'd like to pose to our panelists?
Sure, thank you, Susie. So I wanted to ask a question. I work for the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service, and I support Canadian companies working in developing markets. And my question for the panel is kind of building on the previous question, but what is the role of the private sector in supporting this agenda of women and youth economic development? And how can we kind of support it? I work with Canadian businesses across kind of all different types of sectors, mainly working on World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank projects. But I'm just curious, what is the role of the private sector in all of this? And I'll open that up to the panel, whoever wants to open or answer.
Maybe if I could broaden your question, Leah, both connecting as a business, but then also supporting in the capacity building as well. If I can broaden it to both doing business with and also supporting in the lifting of those boats.
I'm happy to go first. And in terms of the private sector engagement is critical. So when you talk about negotiations and then implementation of the AFCFTA, involving the private sector in discussions and giving feedback on policies is extremely critical. So private sectors, business associations, but also the associations that represent women-owned businesses, involving them every step of the way will be extremely important. So the whole process of implementation involves many steps and monitoring the progress, monitoring the impact. And it's extremely important to have good data and information. So as you monitor progress of implementation, how is it changing the business environment, the employment, the wages? Just gathering this information will be extremely critical. And so involving the private sector in implementation, but also helping gather the information, analyze the progress so far, so that if there's any negative distributional effects on any of the sectors or parts of the society, that you can act upon them because you have the information you need to know what's happening. So just comment.
Great, and one of our audience members pointed out she didn't see this mention of SheTrades. So in the chat, one of our participants pointed out that good places to get this information would be the Organization of Women in International Trade, which is the umbrella of WIT DC. So there's a WIT DC chapter, but then the umbrella organization, OWIT, there's a chapter in Kenya that has great information about this, and also the International Trade Center's SheTrades initiative, who run many programs in Africa, including in Nigeria and others. Feel free to submit any final questions from the audience if you have any. Otherwise, I'm going to pose one myself. So the US, of course, is in the early stages of negotiating a bilateral trade agreement with Kenya. which is just hopefully the first among sub-Saharan African countries. So this is it's important to get it right as a template. So how do we ensure that this future trade agreement caters to women and youth, particularly as it could be replicated for other countries? How do we get it right this time? That's for anyone who wants to join. I think Marilla, that's maybe mostly in your wheelhouse. If I could put you on the spot.
So can you pose your question, please?
Yes. So as the US and Kenya are negotiating a bilateral trade agreement, how do we ensure that the trade agreement caters to women and youth and their success? Especially because this is probably going to be a template for the US with other African countries. So how do we get it right for women and youth in this trade agreement?
If I can come in with that.
Yes, please.
African Union welcomes initiatives that advance the African Union agenda and the vision of building the Africa we want. And I would want to say, as long as it's a pilot project, there's always a pilot project. And as the person you posed it actually says it will be the beginning. And if it has to be benefiting the whole continent, surely it should fit into the African Continental Free Trade Area, a pilot project where I think more will learn from. And Kenya is into it. I mean, in terms of the African Continental Free Trade Area, I think we will align it in the way that it will make other countries also get engaged. So I would want to think that's how it should be done.
You know, I would say an important point is the logistics sector is going to matter a lot, both for the American-Kenya Free Trade Agreement and also for the African Free Trade Agreement. And with the exception of a large informal trade sector that's actually dominated by women, the logistics sector is dominated by men. And I think that modernization of that sector could clearly involve more women and provide more jobs for women and good jobs for women throughout the sector. That means transportation, customs, goods management, but also the introduction of technology, which will be really important to the modernization of the logistics sector. And I think for that, you know, there's lots of girls code initiatives, but a lot of them aren't so specific to what's needed in that sector. And I know that WTO has had a commitment to improving trade logistics and has done a lot. But I think in terms of the new jobs and the new technologies, a focus on women could help a lot. And certainly youth are better placed to learn those technologies and put them to use.
Well, I couldn't agree more with what the other panelists have already mentioned. So just to say that, you know, it will be a first deep agreement between US and one of the members of the AFCFTA. So I think it can pave the way in terms of the level of ambition, in terms of commitments in services, but also in terms of ensuring that, you know, the sustainability of trade and the labor laws. But it could serve as an example to follow as the AFCFTA members negotiate their services commitment. And so basically it could serve as a learning platform and some level of ambition and degree of knowledge sharing that will come out of it will hopefully have positive spillovers for the AFCFTA.
Yeah, and I would want to sit as well and say, in that whole view, the African women trading is a natural thing into African women. It's quite natural. And as I've said before, over 70 of the cross-border traders, especially those engaged in informal trade, are women. And I think that will shape. I think it will be an advantage, more advantage to them as a pilot project for these women to unveil themselves. And I would want to also say the youth elsewhere are very good in technology, and you are aware that the mobile money industry also started in Kenya. And I think if it has to start in Kenya, it will be done in a very good way. I mean, in terms of the knowledge is already there, but it's some more of the knowledge onto these people through other means of training. Then you also mentioned the Young African Leaders Initiative, and I would want to thank the US administration for this initiative. So it will not be totally, in terms of the US being on the ground in Kenya, coming up with a pilot project. Yes, it will be something that is different, but I would want to see it to be more of what we had on the ground, which the US has been working with us already in the continent. Secondly, I want to also take an advantage to also to thank the US administration, the African Women's Entrepreneurship Program. AWIP was put in place in 2010 with the AGOA program. AWIP which is a solid and well-organized network for Africa, which is ready to unlock opportunity to the African Continental Free Trade Area. And for your information, I was privileged to participate virtually last week to the celebration of their 10 years anniversary. So as much as I look at this, I find that it's more richer, it's more ascertain, it's more stronger, and it will make a difference. This kind of project. Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you for that, Ambassador. I know we are out of time, but I wonder if real quickly I could just call on one of our audience members is herself a woman entrepreneur in Nigeria. And I know we've worked with her in some of these capacity building activities. And so Maureen Oboya, I wonder if you could just give us just your 30-second perspective from on the ground as a woman entrepreneur participating in trade. Where do you see us going, and how do we expand on this success for women like yourself?
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's really a privilege, and this year has been both challenging and encouraging at the same time. Encouraging because there's been so much support from different sectors, from SheTrades, from UPS, from AWEP. It's like the whole world has just there's such a wake-up call for the woman entrepreneur and youth as well. It's really been encouraging for us with a lot of capacity building, with a lot of input. But I'd like to say that I think the support really needs to hit home a bit more, because there's a lot of hand-holding that I believe that needs to be done, because the realities on ground are really, really, they're challenging. And sometimes you just need that person that would really hold your hand and work you through the real realities that we go through as women entrepreneurs, especially in Africa, and the challenges that we face, especially in a country like Nigeria. But having said that, for me personally, and I know for a lot of other women entrepreneurs like me in Nigeria and Africa, 2020 has been both a challenging but a very, very encouraging year. I've learned in 1 year what I haven't learned in years. So I think it's really ongoing, but I think we really need to see a bit more in practical terms, and especially also not just in capacity building, but in financial capacity. A lot of us want to expand, a lot of us want to scale up, but we don't know how to access affordable financing and the kind of financing that would really work for the kind of businesses that we do to scale, because we really do want to scale.
That's a great point, and I wish we had more time to unpack that, but I think we are out of time. Maybe if there are any final comments from the panelists that you want to leave us with, otherwise I'll pass it over to Leah. Any final thoughts? Great. Leah, do you want to take over?
Yes. So it looks like we're out of time. Susie and I would like to thank our esteemed speakers, WIT members and guests for joining us today. If you haven't already done so, I encourage you to connect with WIT on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We have some more events coming up, and we would encourage you to check out our events calendar on our website for more information. Thank you all for your time and have a great week. Happy holidays.
Thank you.